The Millionaire's Proposal, a forbidden love story. Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to our special storytelling session, where we bring you tales that warm the heart and stir our deepest emotions. Today, I've brought a story that will touch the very soul of each one of you. It's about Clara, a quiet executive assistant who, for 4 years, harbored an impossible love for her demanding boss. And it's about William, a powerful CEO who secretly desired his assistant, but never had the courage to act on it. Until one day, pressured by his family to produce an heir, William made a proposal that would change everything between them forever. But can Clara hide her long-held feelings for him? And what happens when two hearts that have yearned for each other for years finally meet? I want to thank each and every one of you who are here, accompanying our stories. You make all the difference, and are the reason I continue to bring these exciting narratives to brighten your day and night. Tell me in the comments, what are you doing while listening to our story? Are you cooking that special meal? Organizing the house while getting carried away by the emotion? Perhaps you're gardening, painting your nails, or even working on a personal project. Or, who knows, relaxing in the bathtub after a tiring day. I love knowing how you experience these moments with us. And don't forget to hit that like button if you're already curious to find out how this uncapped passion will ignite between Clara and William. Now, brace your hearts, grab a tissue, and let's begin this thrilling journey together. A Secret Admiration. Our story begins on an ordinary Tuesday morning that would forever change the lives of two people secretly in love. The alarm blared at 5:40 a.m., just as it had every weekday for exactly 4 years and 3 months. Clara Jenkins opened her eyes in the small, impeccably organized bedroom of the one-bedroom apartment she rented in Greenwich Village. For that fleeting second, as she always did upon waking, she allowed herself to dream she was in a larger bed, in a bigger house, in the arms of the man who occupied her thoughts since her first day at work. But, as she always did, she pushed away those dangerous thoughts, climbed out of her narrow bed, and headed to the bathroom to begin another day, pretending to be just the efficient executive assistant everyone knew. At 20s, Clara had become a woman who caught attention without even realizing it. Her dark brown hair fell in natural waves to the middle of her back, always tied in a flawless bun during office hours. Her large, expressive green eyes contrasted with her fair skin, which she religiously protected from the New York City sun. Her curvy figure was hidden behind discreet but well-tailored business attire, which she bought on sale at downtown stores, always choosing pieces that wouldn't draw too much attention, but would make her presentable to work alongside the most powerful and influential man she had ever met. Her morning routine always followed the same calculated steps. A quick but thorough shower, light makeup that subtly enhanced her green eyes, elegantly styled hair, and the careful selection of clothes she would wear to spend 8 hours trying to maintain professional composure while her heart raced every time he spoke to her. That Tuesday morning in April, she chose a navy blue silk blouse she had bought on clearance 3 months earlier, paired with a black pencil skirt that she knew looked good on her body, even though no one had ever noticed. The commute from her home to the office on Park Avenue took exactly 20 minutes by subway and walk. Time Clara used to mentally prepare for the day ahead, review William Archer's schedule in her mind, and try to emotionally brace her heart for 8 more hours of pretending she wasn't falling more in love with him with each passing day. She knew his schedule better than her own. She knew he would arrive at the office at 8:15 a.m., that by 8:20 a.m., his black coffee, no sugar, should be waiting on his desk, that at 9:00 a.m., the first meeting of the day would begin, and that during each of these routine activities, she would need to maintain the mask of professionalism she had perfected over the years. The 40-story building housing the headquarters of Archer Enterprises was one of the most imposing on Park Avenue, with a gleaming glass facade that reflected the constant movement of New York's busiest thoroughfare. Clara exited the streetcar, swiped her card for the exclusive elevator that went straight to the 38th floor where the executive offices were located, and walked through the marble corridors to the anteroom that had been her territory for 4 years. Her workstation was strategically positioned so that she could see the door to William's office, control who entered and exited, and at the same time have a partial view of him through the glass wall separating the spaces. William Archer arrived punctually at 8:15 a.m., as he always did since she had known him. At 34, he was the kind of man who made women turn their heads on the street without him even noticing. Tall, 6 feet 1 inch, broad shoulders that perfectly filled his custom-made Italian suits, dark brown hair always impeccably cut, and intense blue eyes that made her legs feel weak every time he looked directly at her. That morning, he wore a charcoal gray suit that she knew cost more than her 3-month salary, paired with a dark blue tie that enhanced the color of his eyes in a way that made her forget to breathe for a few seconds. "Good morning, Clara. Is the coffee ready?" William asked, passing by her desk. And as always, she felt his masculine scent, an expensive and sophisticated fragrance that left her a little dizzy every time he came near. "Good morning, Mr. Archer. It's on your desk. Hot, just the way you like it." She replied with the firm, professional voice she had learned to use, even though inside her heart was racing, as it always did in the first few minutes of the morning, before she had fully reacclimated to his presence. What Clara didn't know was that William had also developed a morning routine that included thinking about her. He woke up every morning at 6 in his 3,000 square foot penthouse in Tribeca. He worked out in his private home gym, showered in the marble bathroom that was larger than her entire apartment, and while choosing which suit to wear, he found himself imagining what it would be like to have Clara wake up beside him in that king-size bed he had never shared with anyone who truly mattered. He knew he shouldn't think of her that way, that she was his employee, and that any inappropriate move could be considered harassment, but he couldn't control the way his eyes lingered on her face when she wasn't looking, or how he felt the urge to touch her hair every time she leaned over her desk to organize documents. Unspoken desires and mounting pressure. During the 4 years they worked together, they had developed a synergy that went far beyond the normal professional relationship between boss and assistant. Clara knew his every facial expression. She knew when he was worried by the way his eyebrows furrowed, when he was irritated because his lips tightened into a thin line, when he was satisfied because his blue eyes sparkled in a special way. She anticipated his needs even before he realized he needed something. She already had the headache medicine in her hand when she saw him massaging his temples. She had already scheduled a massage for the end of the day when she noticed he was tense. She had already canceled less important commitments when she saw that he needed time to think about a difficult decision. William, in turn, had learned to read Clara in a way she never imagined. He knew that when she lightly bit her lower lip, she was concentrating on a complicated task. That when she twirled a lock of hair around her finger, she was nervous about something. That when her green eyes sparkled more than usual, it was because she was pleased with a job well done. He had memorized the sound of her laugh, which he heard rarely, but which always made him smile, even when he was in the middle of a tense meeting. He had learned the way she answered the phone, always polite and gentle, even with the most difficult clients, and how she had the gift of calming any complicated situation just with the serene tone of her voice. There were moments during the day when the tension between them became almost palpable, even though neither of them ever mentioned anything that wasn't strictly professional. When he needed to explain a document and leaned over her desk, close enough for her to feel the warmth of his body and the perfume that made her dizzy. Clara had to concentrate not to let out a sigh. When she entered his office to deliver reports and leaned slightly to place the papers on the desk, William had to force himself not to notice the delicate curve of her neck or the way her blouse fit her body. There was one particular afternoon, about 2 years after she started working for him, when William was signing contracts and she was organizing the documents he handed over. Their hands brushed briefly when she took a paper he was extending, and both felt an electricity course through their entire bodies. They looked at each other for a few seconds that seemed an eternity, and Clara saw something in his blue eyes that made her understand that maybe he also felt something for her. But before either of them could say anything, the phone rang, breaking the moment, and they returned to their professional routine as if nothing had happened, though both knew that something had changed in that instant. From that day on, the glances between them became more intense and charged with meaning. Clara began to notice that he watched her when she wasn't looking, and William noticed that she also discreetly observed him when he was focused on a task. It was as if both were participating in a silent dance, full of unspoken steps and movements that only they could understand. She began to choose her work clothes, thinking about what he would find appealing, even mentally reprimanding herself for it. He began to invent excuses to call her into his office more often than he really needed, just to have a few minutes of her presence. William's life changed drastically on a Thursday in May, when he received a call he had been expecting for weeks, but at the same time deeply dreaded. It was his father, Arthur Archer, a 68-year-old man who had built the Archer Enterprises empire from scratch and never missed an opportunity to remind his son that everything he had achieved in life was due to the hard work and sacrifices the family had made for decades. The patriarch's deep, authoritative voice echoed through the phone with the usual coldness William had known since childhood. "William, I need to talk to you today. Come home after work. It's about the future of the company and our family." The tone his father used left no room for discussion, and William knew that when Arthur Archer called a family meeting with such seriousness, it meant that important decisions were being made with or without his input. As he hung up the phone, he felt a knot in his stomach that had nothing to do with the usual work problems he was used to solving daily. Clara, who was organizing correspondence on the desk beside him, noticed the change in his expression immediately. She had learned over the years to read every nuance of his facial expressions, and knew that something serious had happened just by the way he tightened his lips and ran his hand through his hair in a nervous gesture he only made when he was truly worried. "Did something serious happen, Mr. Archer?" Clara asked, with the soft, careful voice she always used when she perceived he was going through a difficult time. It was one of her qualities that impressed him most, the ability to perceive when he needed space, or when he needed someone who genuinely cared about his well-being. "My father wants to talk to me tonight about family matters," William replied, trying to maintain a casual tone, but she noticed the tension in his voice. "Do you want me to reschedule tomorrow morning's commitments if the conversation extends?" she offered, and he felt grateful for her consideration, even knowing that he probably wouldn't be able to concentrate on work the next day, regardless of how long the conversation with his father lasted. The ultimatum, the Archer family mansion, was in the Bel Air neighborhood, on a 5-acre property that Arthur had bought in the 80s, when the company truly began to prosper. The main house had over 10,000 square feet of built area, with 8 bedrooms, 6 bathrooms, a living room, dining room, library, office, complete recreation area with a pool, tennis court, and a garden that looked more like a private park. William had grown up in that environment of luxury and privilege, but he never felt completely at ease with the ostentation his father insisted on maintaining, preferring a more discreet, though equally comfortable, lifestyle. When he arrived at the family home that night, William found not only his father waiting for him, but also his Uncle David, Arthur's younger brother, and a minority partner in the company, as well as his mother, Eleanor, an elegant 62-year-old woman who was always the type of person who knew exactly when to remain silent and when to intervene in family discussions. The presence of all the important family members in the main living room already indicated that this would not be a simple conversation about administrative company matters, but one of those family meetings William had learned to dread since adolescence. "Sit down, William. We need to discuss the future of Archer, Inc., Arthur said in a firm voice, gesturing for his son to sit in the leather armchair that had always been considered his spot during family conversations. "As you know, our company is now worth over $800 million, employs nearly 3,000 people, and is one of the most respected construction companies in the country. All of this was built over 40 years of hard work, sacrifices, and careful planning to ensure that the family legacy continues to prosper for generations to come." The patriarch continued, and William already knew where the conversation was heading, though he hoped his intuition was wrong. "Dad, what are you getting at?" William asked, though he already suspected the answer he didn't want to hear. "I'm getting at the fact that you are 34 years old, single, have no children, and apparently have no intention of starting a family," Arthur replied, with the blunt brutality that always characterized his conversations on matters he considered important. "The leadership of a company of our stature cannot remain undefined forever, and I will not allow all of our family's hard work to be lost because you decided you don't want to assume the responsibilities that come with the privileges you've always had." Eleanor, who had remained silent until then, decided to intervene with the more diplomatic tone she always used to mediate discussions between her husband and son. "William, dear, what your father is trying to say is that it's time for you to seriously think about starting a family. It's not just a matter of business succession. It's also about the continuity of the family name, about having someone to share your life with, about building something that goes beyond work." David, who was always the most pragmatic member of the family, added, "We understand that you haven't found the right person yet, but we can't wait indefinitely for that to happen naturally." "And what exactly is your proposal?" William asked, though he dreaded the answer that was about to come. "The proposal is simple and direct," Arthur replied, taking a document from the leather briefcase he had brought to the conversation. "You have 2 years to get married and have a child. If that doesn't happen within that time, the company presidency will pass to your cousin, Robert, who has already shown he's ready to take on the responsibility of continuing the family legacy." Robert was David's son, 29 years old, had been married for 3 years, already had a 2-year-old child, and had always made it clear that he had ambitions to take on a larger role in the family business. The proposal landed like a bomb on William, who had always believed he would have the freedom to choose when and how to start a family without external pressures or artificial deadlines imposed by others. "You're giving me an ultimatum," he said, trying to keep his voice calm, despite the anger that was beginning to boil within him. "We're giving you an opportunity to assume the responsibilities that have always been yours by right, but which come with obligations you cannot continue to ignore," Arthur corrected with his characteristic coldness. "And what if I don't agree to this deadline? What if I decide I don't want to start a family just to satisfy family expectations?" William questioned, knowing he was treading on dangerous ground, but feeling the need to make his position clear. "Then you will willingly give up everything our family has built, and will have to find your own way to earn a living," David replied with a harshness that surprised even Eleanor. "The family business is not just a job, William. It's a legacy. A responsibility, an obligation to the future generations of our family." A desperate thought and a bold proposal. That night, William returned home with his head buzzing with contradictory thoughts and confused feelings he couldn't rationally organize. He loved the company he had helped build over the past 12 years, ever since he graduated with a business degree and began working directly with his father. He loved the challenge of managing large-scale projects, of creating ventures that changed the city's landscape, of generating jobs and opportunities for thousands of people. But at the same time, he deeply resented the idea of having his personal life controlled by family impositions that didn't take into account his feelings, his desires, or his autonomy as an adult. As he poured himself a generous dose of Scotch whiskey on his penthouse balcony, looking at the city lights stretching to the horizon, William found himself thinking about Clara in a way he had never allowed himself to think before. For 4 years, he had maintained a strict professional distance, respecting the boundaries he believed were necessary between boss and employee. But that night, with family pressure weighing on his shoulders and the weight of 2 years echoing in his mind, he began to wonder if he hadn't wasted too much time, being too cautious, if he hadn't missed opportunities to get to know the only woman who truly aroused his interest and admiration. Clara was intelligent, dedicated, reliable, and possessed a natural beauty that attracted him in a way he had never experienced with any of the women in his social circle. She knew his routine, his tastes, his preferences, his quirks better than anyone, and yet had never shown any sign of impatience or judgment. She was the person he spoke to most every day, the person he trusted most for professional matters, and perhaps she was also the person who knew him best as a human being, beyond the facade of the successful executive he maintained before the world. For the first time in 4 years, William allowed himself to imagine what it would be like if he had the courage to break down the professional barriers he had built between them, what it would be like if he could talk to her about his feelings, his fears, his doubts about the future. Did she feel anything for him, beyond professional loyalty? Did the intense glances they sometimes exchanged mean something deeper? Did she also think of him when they weren't working together? The following Friday was one of the longest and most tense days Clara had ever experienced since she started working with William. From the moment he arrived at the office in the morning, she noticed something was different in his behavior. He was quieter than usual, canceled 2 important meetings without detailed explanations, and spent most of the day locked in his office, staring out the window with a pensive expression she had never seen before. During lunch, he didn't even leave his office. He just asked her to order something light from a nearby restaurant, and when she brought the food, he barely touched the plate. Clara knew William well enough to know when he was going through a serious problem. But this time, she felt it was something different from the usual work stresses he was used to managing. There was a tension in the air that she couldn't identify, a heavy energy that made her stomach clench every time she had to enter his office to deliver documents or reports. He was polite, as always, but there was a distance in his demeanor that left her confused and slightly worried about the possibility of having done something wrong without realizing it. The hours passed with torturous slowness, and when the end of the workday finally arrived, Clara expected William to leave as he always did, leaving her alone to organize the next day's schedule and close out the last pending details. But instead, he appeared at her office door when the clock showed exactly 6 in the evening and said, "Clara, can you stay a little longer? I need to talk to you about something important." His tone of voice was serious but not threatening, and she nodded affirmatively, feeling her heart race without knowing exactly why. They were alone on the executive floor, with just the city lights beginning to come on outside, creating a more intimate atmosphere that Clara was not used to sharing with him. William asked her to sit in one of the armchairs in front of his desk, and instead of staying in the formal position behind the desk, he sat in the other armchair, creating a physical proximity that made her heart race even faster. There was something in his posture, in the way his blue eyes looked at her with a different intensity, that made her understand that this conversation would not be about work. "Clara, how long have you worked with me?" William asked, though both knew the answer to this question exactly. 4 years and 3 months, Mr. Archer, she replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite the confusion she was feeling. "And during all that time, have you ever seen me with any serious relationship? Have you ever heard me talk about plans to start a family?" He continued, and she shook her head, starting to wonder where this line of questioning was leading. "Last night I had a conversation with my family," William said, getting up from the armchair and walking towards the window, turning his back to her as he spoke. "They gave me an ultimatum. I have 2 years to get married and have a child, or I lose the company presidency to my cousin." The words came out loaded with a bitterness she had never heard in his voice before, and Clara felt her stomach clench with a mixture of surprise and something she couldn't quite identify. He turned to look directly at her, and for the first time in 4 years, Clara saw real vulnerability in his blue eyes that always seemed so confident and determined. "I don't want an arranged marriage. I don't want to marry some woman from my family's social circle just to fulfill an obligation. But at the same time, I can't lose everything I've helped build over the past 12 years. He paused, sat back in the armchair in front of her, and leaned forward, further closing the distance between them. "Clara, you are the only woman I completely trust," he said, and the words made her heart stop for a few seconds before returning to beat at a desperate rhythm. "You know me better than anyone. You know how I think, how I work, how I react in different situations. You are intelligent, responsible, reliable." And he hesitated for a moment, as if struggling to find the right words. "And you are the most beautiful woman I know." The confession came out as a whisper, laden with an emotion she had never heard in his voice, and Clara felt her cheeks flush as she tried to process what was happening. "Mr. Archer, I don't understand what you're trying to say," she managed to say, although a part of her was already beginning to suspect the direction the conversation was taking, and another part couldn't believe it was really possible. "I'm asking you to help me, Clara," William said, leaning even further forward and taking her hands in his in a gesture that sent electricity through her entire body. "I'm asking you to have a child with me." The words hung in the air between them, charged with a meaning that would forever change the relationship they had built over the years. Clara looked at his large, warm hands, enveloping her small, delicate ones, and felt as if the entire world had stopped turning at that moment. For 4 years, she had daydreamed about the possibility of him noticing her as a woman. She had imagined what it would be like if he kissed her, what it would be like if they could be more than just boss and assistant. But never, not even in her boldest dreams, had she imagined that he would ask her to have his child. An unconventional agreement. How exactly would that work? She asked, trying to maintain some rationality despite the whirlwind of emotions she was feeling. "It would be an agreement between the two of us," William explained, without letting go of her hands. "You would have a baby, and I would assume all legal and financial responsibilities. In return, you would receive financial compensation that would change your life forever, in addition to having the guarantee that you would always have a special place in the child's life." "And then?" Clara asked, feeling her voice tremble slightly. "Then we would see how things develop," he replied. And there was something in his eyes that suggested he also wasn't sure how the situation would evolve. "Clara, I know it's a lot to ask. I know it's a decision that would completely change your life, but you are the only person I trust enough for something so important." They remained silent for long minutes, looking at each other with an intensity that had never existed between them before. Clara could feel the warmth of his hands enveloping hers. She could feel his masculine perfume that always made her dizzy. She could see in his blue eyes a mixture of hope and vulnerability that made her want to protect him from all the pressure he was suffering. "Can I think about it?" she finally asked, although she knew deep in her heart that her answer was already decided from the moment he had asked the question. "Of course, it's a very important decision," William said, gently squeezing her hands before releasing them. "Take all the time you need." "But Clara," he paused, looking directly into her green eyes. "I want you to know that, regardless of your answer, nothing will change between us professionally. You will always have your job here. You will always have my respect and my admiration." When Clara finally arrived home that night, she sat on the small bed in her rented apartment and tried to organize the thoughts that were in a complete whirlwind. The man she had secretly loved for 4 years had just asked her to have his child. Not for love, not because he wanted to start a family with her, but because he needed a solution to a family problem. But at the same time, he had said that she was the only woman he trusted. He had said that she was beautiful. He had held her hands in a way that seemed to carry much more meaning than a simple business agreement. She spent the entire night awake, alternating between the euphoria of imagining what it would be like to carry William's child and the reality that it would not be based on mutual love, at least not from his part. But when the sun rose on Saturday morning, illuminating the small room where she had spent so many nights dreaming of him, Clara already knew what her answer would be. She would call him on Monday and say yes, because having a piece of him forever, even in this unconventional way, was better than continuing to love him in silence forever. Monday arrived with a light rain that made New York City even grayer than usual. But for Clara, it was as if the sun was shining with an intensity she had never felt before. She arrived at the office at 7:40 a.m., 20 minutes earlier than normal, and spent those extra minutes mentally organizing the words she would say to William when he arrived. The weekend had been an eternity of contradictory thoughts, daydreams, and a growing certainty that this was her only chance to have something real with the man she had loved for so long. When William arrived punctually at 8:15 a.m., he greeted her with the same professional good morning as always, but Clara noticed that his blue eyes watched her with a different attention, as if he was trying to read in her expression what her answer would be to the question he had asked on Friday. They maintained the normal routine for the first 2 hours of the day, with him participating in a video conference with investors from Los Angeles, and her organizing the correspondence that had accumulated over the weekend. But both knew that the pending conversation hung in the air like a cloud charged with electricity. At 10:30 in the morning, during a break between meetings, Clara delicately knocked on his office door and said, "Mr. Archer, can I speak with you for a few minutes?" He nodded affirmatively and gestured for her to sit in the same chair where they had talked on Friday, but this time he remained behind his desk, as if trying to maintain some safe distance for what was to come. "I've thought a lot about our conversation," Clara began, feeling her hands tremble slightly and intertwining her fingers to disguise her nervousness. "And I accept your proposal." The words came out firmer than she expected, and she saw the immediate relief that passed through his eyes, followed by something that looked like gratitude, and also a deeper emotion that he tried to quickly hide. "Clara, are you absolutely sure?" William asked, getting up from his chair and walking towards the window, as if he needed a moment to process the answer he so longed to hear. "It's a decision that will change your life forever, and I don't want you to feel pressured or regret accepting later." There was genuine concern in his voice that made her realize that, despite needing her help, he truly cared about her well-being. "I'm sure," she replied, surprised by the conviction in her own voice. "But I'd like to know exactly how this would work. Would it be done through a clinic with artificial fertilization?" The question came out accompanied by a blush on her cheeks, because despite being a practical and necessary question, talking about such intimate details with him made her feel uncomfortable in a way she had never experienced. William turned to look directly at her, and there was something in his expression that made her heart beat dangerously fast. "Actually, I was thinking we could do this more naturally," he said, and the way he pronounced the word naturally filled the entire room with a sexual tension neither of them knew how to handle. Clinics are cold, impersonal, and involve a lot of people who don't need to know about our personal matters. If we're going to do this, I'd prefer it to be just between the two of us. The suggestion hung in the air between them, laden with implications that completely changed the nature of the agreement they had discussed. Clara felt her face grow even hotter and realized that her breathing had become shallower. The idea of being intimate with William, even if only to conceive a child, was something she had dreamed of so many times that it now seemed unreal that it could actually happen. "How would that work?" she asked, trying to maintain some composure despite the whirlwind of emotions she was feeling. "Well, we would have to meet during your fertile periods," William explained, and she noticed that he was also slightly uncomfortable with the intimate nature of the conversation, but determined to be direct and honest about all aspects of the agreement. "I could reserve a discreet apartment where we could meet without anyone knowing about our arrangement." The idea of secret meetings with him made her stomach clench with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation she had never felt before. "And after I get pregnant?" she asked, trying to focus on the practical aspects so as not to get completely lost in the romantic implications of the situation. "After that, you would continue working here normally during the pregnancy. I would take care of all medical expense and anything else you needed. And when the baby was born, we would see how to arrange custody and the upbringing of the child." "And the financial compensation?" Clara asked, feeling slightly uncomfortable discussing money in such an intimate context, but knowing it was important to have all the details clear from the beginning. $500,000, William replied without hesitation. $250,000 when we confirm the pregnancy, and the rest when the baby is born. In addition, I would buy an apartment in your name so you have complete financial independence. The amount was more money than Clara had imagined seeing in her entire life, enough to completely change her financial situation and give her a security she had never had. But at the same time, the part of her that had been in love with William for 4 years slightly resented the idea of receiving money for something she would do for free, just for the pleasure of being intimately close to him. "When would we start?" she asked, feeling her cheeks flush again. "When is your next fertile period?" William asked, and the intimacy of the question made her realize how completely that conversation had changed the dynamic between them. "In 2 weeks," she replied softly, barely able to believe she was discussing such personal details with a man she had secretly loved for so long. "Then in 2 weeks," William said, sitting back behind his desk, as if the physical distance could lessen the tension that was growing between them. "I'll arrange a discreet apartment and give you the address. It will be a comfortable and private place where we won't need to worry about acquaintances or awkward situations." They spent a few more minutes discussing practical details, how they would communicate about the meetings, how they would maintain absolute discretion, how they would handle the situation in the workplace so that no one suspected anything. But beneath all the practicality of the conversation, there was an electric current of sexual anticipation that neither of them knew how to express or handle. When Clara finally returned to her desk, she sat in her chair and remained for a few minutes trying to process what had just happened. In 2 weeks, she would be in an apartment with William, not as his assistant, but as the woman he had chosen to have his child. The fantasy she had harbored in her heart for so long was about to become reality, even if it wasn't exactly in the romantic way she had always imagined. During the rest of the day, They maintained the professional facade perfectly. But Clara noticed that something fundamental had changed in the way he looked at her. There was a new intensity in his blue eyes, a different way of pronouncing her name, a tension in the air every time they were alone in the same room. When he handed her documents, his fingers lingered a few seconds longer, touching hers. When she leaned over his desk to show a report, she felt his eyes observing not only the work, but also the curve of her neck, the way her blouse fit her body. That night, when Clara arrived home, she looked at herself in the small bathroom mirror and tried to imagine what it would be like to be in William's arms, what it would be like to feel his hands touching her skin, what it would be like to surrender completely to the man she loved, even if it was within the confines of an agreement that had specific objectives. She knew it would be impossible for her to completely separate the feelings she harbored for him from the physical intimacy they would share, but she was willing to accept any form of proximity with him, even if it came with emotional complications. A spark ignites. The next 2 weeks passed with torturous slowness, each day laden with a growing anticipation that left both of them slightly nervous and hyper-aware of each other's presence. William provided a furnished apartment in a discreet building in Manhattan, in a building where there was no risk of encountering acquaintances or people from their social circle. On the appointed day, he discreetly handed her the key along with the address written on a piece of paper that she tucked into her bag with trembling hands. The apartment was small but elegant, with neutral decor in shades of beige and white that created a cozy atmosphere without being excessively intimate. Clara arrived first at 7 in the evening on a Thursday, wearing a simple but pretty navy blue dress she had bought especially for the occasion, not knowing exactly what kind of clothes would be appropriate for such a unique encounter. Her hands trembled slightly as she looked out the window at a tree-lined street, trying to calm the nerves that made her stomach churn with anxiety and anticipation. When William arrived 15 minutes later, she noticed that he was also nervous, despite trying to maintain his usual composure. He had changed from his formal suit into a light blue dress shirt and casual dark trousers, and his hair was slightly disheveled, as if he had run his hands through it multiple times on the way there. They greeted each other in an oddly formal way, as if they were two people meeting for the first time, instead of colleagues who had worked together for 4 years. "Do you want something to drink?" William asked, walking to the open-plan kitchen integrated into the living room. "Is there wine, whiskey, water, soda?" The list of options tumbled out, revealing a nervousness she had never seen in him during business meetings with millions of dollars at stake. "A little red wine, please," Clara replied, thinking that perhaps the alcohol would help lessen the tension she was feeling. They sat on the small sofa in the living room, maintaining a respectful distance, but aware of each other's every movement. William poured 2 glasses of wine that probably cost more than her monthly salary, and they sipped in silence for a few minutes, trying to find a natural way to start something that was completely new for both of them. There had never been an etiquette manual for this type of situation, and they were improvising every gesture, every word. "Clara, I want you to know that you don't have to do anything you don't feel comfortable doing," William said finally, looking directly into her green eyes. "We can talk first, get to know each other outside of the work environment, without pressure for anything to happen today if you're not ready." His consideration made her even more nervous, but also more in love, because it revealed a gentle side she had always suspected existed beneath his professional facade. "I know this is strange for both of us," Clara replied, feeling her cheeks flush slightly. "For 4 years we maintained a strictly professional relationship, and now we're here to... She couldn't finish the sentence, and William gently completed it. "To create a life together, even if it's in an unconventional way." The way he said "together" loaded the word with a meaning that went beyond the practical aspects of their agreement. They began to talk about things they had never discussed during their years of working together. Their families, childhood dreams, books they enjoyed reading, movies that moved them, trips they wanted to take. Clara discovered that William had studied piano as a child and still played occasionally when he was stressed. He discovered that she wrote romantic short stories in her spare time and dreamed of publishing a book someday. As the conversation flowed and the wine relaxed their initial tensions, they gradually grew closer, physically. William ran his hand through her hair, commenting on how soft it was. Clara touched his hand when he told her about the pressure he felt to meet family expectations. Their touches became more frequent and prolonged, charged with an electricity that neither of them could ignore. "Clara, may I kiss you?" William asked, when their faces were a few inches apart, and the respectful question made her heart race even faster. Instead of answering with words, she leaned forward, and when their lips met for the first time, it was as if 4 years of accumulated tension exploded in a moment of pure chemistry. The kiss began soft and hesitant, but quickly deepened as both realized that the attraction they had tried to ignore for so long was real and overwhelming. William's hands intertwined in her hair, while Clara's hands clutched his shirt, pulling him closer. When they finally separated to breathe, both were breathless and their eyes shining with desire. "Are you sure?" William whispered against her lips, and Clara responded by pulling him into another, even more intense kiss. They got up from the sofa without separating their lips, walking awkwardly towards the bedroom, stumbling slightly over the coffee table, but laughing softly at the lack of coordination caused by urgent desire. In the bedroom, they slowly undressed, exploring every inch of each other's skin with a reverence that transformed what should have been a purely functional encounter into something deeply intimate and emotional. William whispered her name like a prayer, while Clara discovered that all the fantasies she had had about him over the years didn't even come close to the reality of having him touch her with a tenderness that made her feel precious and desired. When they finally came together, it was with an intensity that surprised them. It wasn't just the fulfillment of an agreement, but the consummation of an attraction that had grown silently for years. Clara surrendered completely, and William responded with a passion that revealed his feelings for her went far beyond the convenience of the agreement they had made. Afterward, they lay embraced in bed, her head resting on his chest, listening to their heartbeats gradually returning to a normal rhythm. "That was," William began, but couldn't find words to describe what had happened between them. "Different than I expected," Clara completed, tracing lazy circles on his chest with her finger. "How was it different?" he asked, kissing the top of her head. "I thought it would be more technical, less emotional," she confessed, raising her face to look into his blue eyes. "It was different for me, too," William admitted, tenderly caressing her face. "Much more intense and meaningful than I imagined it would be." They met again 3 times that week, always using the excuse of maximizing conception opportunities, but both knew something was happening between them that went far beyond reproductive goals. Each encounter was more passionate than the last, and they began to spend more time talking after intimacy, sharing stories, dreams, fears, and discovering they had an emotional compatibility they had never explored during their years of professional relationship. At the office, they maintained the professional facade perfectly, but there was a new energy between them that was almost palpable. More intense glances, secret smiles, a new intimacy in the way he pronounced her name or how she organized the papers on her desk. Clara found herself fantasizing about their encounters during work hours, and William invented excuses to call her into his office just to be near her for a few minutes. A life begins. A love deepens. 2 weeks after their first encounter, when Clara was 3 days late, she bought a pregnancy test at a pharmacy near her home and took the test on a Saturday morning. When the 2 lines appeared on the display, confirming what she already suspected, she felt a mixture of joy, fear, and a euphoria that made her cry with emotion. She called William immediately, and when he answered with a voice still rough with sleep, she simply said, "It was positive." The silence on the other end of the line lasted only a few seconds before he said, "My God, Clara, we did it." The emotion in his voice was unmistakable, and she realized that for him too, this had become much more than a business agreement. "Can I come over? I want to be with you now," he asked, and she nodded, even knowing he couldn't see her through the phone. When William arrived at her apartment an hour later, carrying flowers and a smile that lit up his entire face, Clara realized that something fundamental had changed between them. He hugged her with an intensity that suggested she was no longer just the assistant who was helping him with a problem, but the woman who was carrying his child and who had become someone special in his life, in a way neither of them had planned or expected. The medical confirmation of the pregnancy came on a sunny Monday morning when Clara and William sat side by side in the office of Dr. Edward Green, a renowned obstetrician William had chosen for his discretion and competence. The blood test showed perfectly healthy hormone levels for a 5-week pregnancy, and when the doctor smiled and said, "Congratulations, you're going to be parents," Clara felt tears of joy streaming down her face as William squeezed her hand with a strength that revealed all the emotion he was trying to control. "How are you feeling?" Dr. Green asked, adjusting his glasses and flipping through the new file he had just created for Clara. "Some mild morning sickness, a little breast tenderness, but nothing too intense yet," she replied, still processing the reality that she was really pregnant with the child of the man she had loved for so long. "It's completely normal for this stage of pregnancy," the doctor reassured her. "We'll schedule monthly appointments and monitor everything closely to ensure both mother and baby are always healthy." When they left the office, William gently took her arm and said, "We need to talk about some practical changes now that the pregnancy has been confirmed." They went to a cafe near the hospital, sat at a reserved table at the back of the establishment, and he began to explain the plans he had made over the past few days since she had called with the news of the positive test. "First, I want you to move into a better apartment," William said, pulling a paper from the inner pocket of his jacket. "I found a place in Upper East Side, 2 bedrooms, spacious living room, modern kitchen, in a building with security, and all the infrastructure you'll need during pregnancy and later with the baby." The information came out in an organized manner, as if he had rehearsed this conversation. But Clara noticed an anxiety beneath his apparent calm. "William, that's very generous, but I don't want you to feel you need to take care of me as if I were a responsibility," she said, distractedly stirring her cup of chamomile tea she had ordered. "It's not about responsibility, Clara," he replied, leaning forward across the table. "It's about wanting you and our child to have all the comfort and security possible. And also," he hesitated for a moment, "it's also about me wanting to be close by, wanting to follow every moment of this pregnancy." The confession surprised her, because it suggested an emotional involvement that went beyond what they had initially agreed upon. "How do you mean, close by?" she asked, feeling her heart race with the possibilities those words suggested. "The apartment I chose is only 2 blocks from mine. I'd like to be able to visit you regularly, bring dinner when you don't feel like cooking, be available if you need anything during the night," William explained. and there was a vulnerability in his voice she had never heard before. Over the following weeks, Clara moved into the new apartment, which was more luxurious than any place she had ever lived. Modern and comfortable furniture, state-of-the-art appliances, decor in soft tones that created a cozy and relaxing atmosphere. William had thought of every detail: extra pillows for the sofa, an air humidifier for the bedroom, a specially ergonomic armchair for when she needed to rest during pregnancy. What impressed her most was discovering that he had chosen one of the rooms to be transformed into an office for her, complete with a bookshelf, a desk, and a small plaque on the door where Clara's corner was written in handwriting she recognized as his own. "I thought you could work from home when you didn't feel well enough to go to the office, and you could also use this space to write your stories," he explained when she discovered the room. His visits began timidly and respectfully. A phone call asking if she needed anything from the grocery store, a quick appearance at lunchtime with food from a healthy restaurant, a stop by in the late afternoon to see how her day had been. But gradually, these visits became longer and more frequent, until it became natural for him to appear at lunchtime and stay until after she fell asleep on the sofa, watching television. One night, when Clara was 8 weeks pregnant and going through a phase of more intense nausea, William arrived at the apartment and found her sitting on the sofa, pale and clearly uncomfortable. "How do you feel?" he asked, sitting on the part of the sofa next to her and putting his hand on her forehead to check for a fever. "The nausea is worse today. I haven't been able to keep anything down since breakfast," she confessed, closing her eyes and letting herself relax with his gentle touch. "Have you taken the medication Dr. Green prescribed?" William asked. And when she nodded affirmatively, he got up and went to the kitchen. A few minutes later, he returned with a ginger tea he had prepared and lightly toasted bread. "My mother used to make this when I was sick," he explained, helping her sit up and offering the cup. "Ginger helps with nausea, and plain toast is easy to digest." His care moved her deeply, because it revealed a protective and caring side she had never seen during their years of working together. He stayed with her late that night, massaging her feet when she complained they were swollen, adjusting the pillows to make her more comfortable, and simply talking about light topics to distract her from the discomfort. "William, can I ask you something?" Clara said when he was getting ready to leave. "Of course you can ask anything," he replied, stopping at the living room door. "Why are you being so caring with me? So attentive? This goes far beyond what we agreed upon in our arrangement," she asked, looking directly into his blue eyes. He was silent for long seconds, as if struggling internally about what he could reveal of the feelings that were growing inside him. "Because you are no longer the woman who is helping me have an heir," he finally said. "You are the person who is carrying my child, who is going through discomforts and changes in her body because of me, and who has become very important to me in a way I didn't expect." The confession hung between them, loaded with meanings neither of them knew how to fully process. "Important how?" she asked softly, feeling her heart race with the possibilities implicit in the answer. "Important like the person I think about when I wake up in the morning, like the person I want to see at the end of each day, like the person I worry about in a way that goes far beyond professional responsibility?" William replied, moving closer to the sofa again. "William," Clara began, but he knelt beside the sofa and took her hands in his. "I know our agreement didn't include personal feelings. I know we started this as a practical solution to a specific problem, but I can't deny that I've developed feelings for you that go far beyond what was planned," he confessed, looking directly into her green eyes. "What kind of feelings?" she asked, even though she suspected the answer and felt a hope growing in her chest. "Feelings of protection, of affection, of love," The last word came out as a whisper laden with vulnerability. "I've fallen in love with you, Clara. Not just for the mother of my child, but for you as a woman, as a person, as a partner I never knew I was looking for." Tears streamed down her face, but this time they were tears of pure happiness. "I've fallen in love with you too," she confessed, squeezing his hands in hers. "In fact, I've been in love with you for a long time, ever since the first few months we worked together. Accepting your arrangement was as much about helping you as it was about having a chance to be close to you in a more intimate way." They kissed then, there on the living room sofa, with a passion that was different from the encounters they had had to conceive the baby. It was a kiss that sealed a mutual declaration of love, that transformed a business agreement into a real love story, that promised a future built on true feelings instead of practical convenience. That night, William stayed overnight at the apartment for the first time. Not in the guest room he had prepared, but in her bed, holding her in his arms as they talked about the future they now envisioned together. They talked about names for the baby, about what it would be like to raise a family, about how they would transform that agreement into a real and lasting relationship, a public declaration, and a growing family. The 12th week of pregnancy brought visible changes in Clara's body that made William become even more protective and possessive in a way he had never experienced. Her belly was beginning to round slightly, creating a subtle curve he couldn't stop tenderly touching whenever they were alone. Her breasts had increased and become more sensitive, and he treated every inch of her body with a reverence that made her feel like the most desired and precious woman in the world. It was during a routine checkup with Dr. Green that something definitively changed the way William saw their situation. They were in the waiting room when a young, attractive man approached Clara with an interested smile. "Excuse me for disturbing, but don't you work at Archer Inc.? I'm Robert Evans from Evans & Associates Construction. We met at a conference last year," the man said, clearly interested in making conversation with her. "Oh yes, I remember you," Clara replied politely, but William immediately tensed beside her, possessively placing his hand on her waist in a clear display of territoriality. "This is my wife, Clara," William said, lying shamelessly, but with a conviction that made her heart race. "We're here for a prenatal appointment." The word wife came out loaded with a possessiveness that made Robert uncomfortable enough to quickly say goodbye. "Wife?" Clara asked when they were alone again, trying to hide the smile that threatened to appear on her face. "I didn't like the way he was looking at you," William replied with a blunt honesty that surprised her. "You're pregnant with my child, Clara. Any man who looks at you with interest will have to deal with me first." The primitive, masculine declaration should have irritated her, but instead, it excited her in a way she didn't expect. Over the following weeks, William's possessive behavior intensified in ways that revealed how much he had emotionally attached himself not only to the baby, but to her. When they went out for dinner, he kept his hand on the small of her back or on her growing belly, in a public display that she was with him. When other men looked at her longer than he considered appropriate, he would move closer, sometimes even possessively kissing her in front of strangers. "You're being very jealous," Clara commented one night when they were dining at an expensive restaurant in Greenwich Village, and she had noticed how he tensed when the waiter was especially attentive to her. "I'm not jealous, I'm protective," William corrected, cutting his salmon with rougher movements than necessary. "There's a difference." But the defensive tone in his voice revealed that he, too, was surprised by the intensity of the possessive feelings he had developed. "And what's the difference?" she asked, amused by the more primitive side of him that was emerging as the pregnancy progressed. "The difference is that jealousy is about insecurity, and what I feel is about protecting something precious that is mine," William explained, looking directly into her green eyes. "You and our child are mine now, Clara. I know we didn't start this as a traditional relationship, but that's what it has become for me." The declaration of ownership should have made her uncomfortable for being politically incorrect, but instead, it awakened a primitive excitement in her that left her speechless. There was something deeply feminine about being desired and protected in that way by a man like William, something that stirred instincts she didn't even know she possessed. "I like it when you get possessive," she confessed softly, surprised by her own honesty. "It makes me feel desired in a way I've never felt before." This confession changed something in their dynamic. William stopped apologizing for his possessive behavior and began to express it more openly and confidently. He started introducing her as his girlfriend at social events, even though technically they had never formalized the relationship that way. He bought an expensive and elegant engagement ring that he wore on his right hand, as a symbol that he was unavailable to other men. The most significant change was when Clara completed 14 weeks, and they went to a corporate event where several construction companies gathered for an annual conference. It was the first time she had appeared publicly beside him as something more than his assistant, and William made sure everyone knew exactly her position in his life. "I'd like to introduce my girlfriend, Clara Jenkins," he told a group of influential businessmen, with his arm firmly wrapped around her waist. "She's pregnant with my first child." The proud way he made the announcement, as if she were a precious trophy he had won, made her heart overflow with happiness. For the first time in her life, she felt truly valued and desired by a man. Throughout the evening, she observed how he treated her with a mixture of protection and adoration that moved her. When she mentioned that her feet were hurting because of her heels, he immediately found a chair for her to sit in. When she said she was thirsty, he brought her cold water and stayed by her side to ensure she drank enough. When other men approached to greet her, he positioned himself so that it was clear she was accompanied. "Are you enjoying being treated like a queen?" William asked, as they danced slowly on the dance floor, his hands carefully resting on her waist, avoiding pressing on her belly that was becoming more evident. "I'm enjoying feeling special to you," she replied, resting her head on his chest and breathing in his masculine perfume that always made her dizzy. "Feeling like I'm the most important woman in your life." "You are the most important woman in my life," he said, kissing the top of her head as they continued to sway to the soft music. "Not just because you're carrying my child, but because you've become the person I most want to see every day. The person I trust most. The person I fell in love with in a way I never thought possible." The declaration was made in a low voice, but charged with a sincerity that made her melt completely in his arms. That night, when they returned to their apartment, they made love with a passion that reflected all the emotional intensity that had grown between them. William treated her as if she were made of crystal, touching every inch of her skin with an adoration that made her cry with emotion. He whispered words of love and admiration as he kissed her, telling her how beautiful and pregnant she was, how he loved seeing her carrying his child, how she had become everything to him. "I never thought it was possible to love someone this way," Clara confessed later, sitting in his arms with her head resting on his bare chest, listening to his heartbeats that had calmed after their passion. "This way how?" William asked, stroking her hair that was spread over the pillow. "With such intensity, with so much feeling, as if you were part of me," she explained, tracing lazy circles on his chest with her finger. "I've never felt anything like this either," William admitted, kissing her head tenderly. "When I see you pregnant, when I think about our child growing inside you, when I imagine our family together, I feel a completeness that I never knew was missing in my life." They talked late into the night about the future they were building together, about how they wanted to raise their child, about the values they wanted to instill, about how they would transform that apartment into a real home for the family they were forming. For the first time since she had accepted the original agreement, Clara felt completely secure about the choices she had made. It was no longer about money or convenience, but about real love, about a genuine connection, about building something lasting and meaningful with the man she loved. And for the first time, she truly believed that they would have a happy ending together, a true family, and a beautiful beginning. The 8th month of pregnancy brought a radiant Clara and a William, completely transformed by the love he had discovered. Her belly was now impossible to hide, round and firm, and he couldn't go a day without placing his hands on it to feel the baby's movements, which seemed increasingly active. It was on a rainy Saturday afternoon when they were in their apartment, Hanimema, watching an old movie, that everything definitively changed between them in a way that would forever seal both their destinies. Clara was reclining on the sofa with her feet resting on a pillow, wearing a loose dress in shades of blue that enhanced the special glow of her skin that pregnancy had brought. Her hair was tied in a messy bun, with a few strands escaping and framing her face that had gained softer, more feminine curves during gestation. William was sitting next to her, delicately massaging her swollen feet that had become a constant problem in recent weeks. "They're really swollen today," she commented, wincing when he pressed an especially sensitive spot. "Dr. Green says it's normal at this stage, but it's getting harder and harder to walk for long or stand for too long." The discomfort in her voice made William feel guilty for being responsible for the changes her body was undergoing, even knowing that she had consciously chosen to go through it. "I'm so sorry you're going through all this discomfort because of me," William said, continuing the massage, but with even more careful movements. "If I could carry the baby instead, I would do it without hesitation." The sincerity in his voice deeply moved her, because she knew he genuinely cared about her well-being, in a way that went far beyond the responsibility he felt for the agreement they had made. "I wouldn't change anything," Clara replied, placing her hand over his that rested on her ankle. "Carrying your child is one of the greatest privileges of my life, William. Every discomfort, every change in my body, every difficult moment is worth it, because I'm creating a life that is part of both of us." The way she said "both of us" loaded the phrase with a meaning that made his heart clench with emotion. The baby chose that moment to give an especially strong kick, making her belly move visibly. William immediately moved his hands to the spot, smiling when he felt the tiny foot or fist pressing against his palm through her skin. "He's getting stronger every day," he commented, with an admiration in his voice that never lessened, no matter how many times he felt his child's movements. "Or she," Clara corrected, as she always did when he referred to the baby in the masculine. They had decided not to find out the sex before birth, wanting it to be a surprise. But William always referred to the child as he, in an unconscious demonstration that he secretly hoped for a boy. "I dreamed yesterday that it was a girl with your green eyes," he confessed, tracing soft circles on her belly. "And she was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen in my life." "And what if it really is a girl? Would you be disappointed?" Clara asked, observing his expression carefully. It was a concern that had occasionally bothered her, mainly because she knew his family had specific expectations about the continuity of the name and male traditions. "I would be completely head over heels," William replied, without hesitating for a second. "Boy or girl, this baby is part of you, and that automatically makes him or her the most precious thing in the world to me." His answer completely reassured her, but also awakened a courage that had been building up for weeks, to ask a question that tormented her. "William, can I ask you something important?" she said, shifting her position on the sofa to face him. "Of course you can ask anything," he replied, perceiving by the seriousness in her tone that it was something significant. "What's going to happen to us after the baby is born?" The question came out laden with a vulnerability she tried to hide, but which was impossible to completely disguise. "I know we started this as an agreement, that you needed an heir and I agreed to help. But now," she hesitated, searching for the right words, "now everything has changed so much between us that I don't know what the original plan is anymore and what the new plan is." William completely stopped the massage and looked her in the eyes with an intensity that made her heart race. There was something in his expression that suggested that question was exactly what he had been waiting for her to ask, as if he too was looking for an opportunity to clarify the feelings and intentions that had evolved over the months. "The original plan died a long time ago, Clara," he said, moving closer to her on the sofa. "It probably died on the first night we spent together, when I realized that something much deeper was happening between us than just a business agreement." He took her hands in his. That gesture that had become so familiar and comforting over the months. "What I feel for you now has nothing to do with inheritance, family businesses, or social obligations." "What do you feel for me?" she asked, even though she knew he had already confessed his feelings before. She needed to hear it again. She needed confirmation that she wasn't imagining the intensity of the love that had grown between them. "I love you, Clara," William said, with a simplicity that made the declaration even more powerful. "I fell in love with you in a way I didn't know was possible. You are no longer the assistant who agreed to help me. You are the woman of my life, the mother of my child, the person I want to build a future with." Tears began to stream down her face, even before she realized she was crying. "I love you too," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "I've loved you since long before I accepted your agreement. I've loved you since the first few months we worked together, when I learned to admire not only the competent professional, but the integral and caring man you are. So marry me," William said, and the words came out with a naturalness that surprised both of them. Not because of the baby, not because of the company, not because of family pressures. "Marry me because you love me and I love you, because we want to build a real family together, because we can no longer imagine our lives apart." The proposal didn't come with a ring or an elaborate ceremony, but it was made right there on the living room sofa, with him holding her hands and looking into her green eyes that sparkled with tears of happiness. "Are you asking me to marry you?" Clara asked, as if she needed to be sure she had understood correctly. "I'm asking you to be my wife for real, to raise our child together, to face anything life brings together," William confirmed. "Yes," she replied, without hesitating for a second. "Yes, I want to marry you. I want to be your wife. I want to build a real family with you. I want to spend the rest of my life loving you and being loved by you." They kissed then, there on the sofa, with her big belly between them and the baby moving as if celebrating their parents' decision too. "We're going to get married before the baby is born," William said when they separated from the kiss. "I want our child to be born into an officially constituted family, with parents who truly love each other and who chose to be together for love, not out of obligation." The idea of marrying while pregnant, of formalizing their love before the baby's arrival, filled Clara with a happiness she had never imagined possible. That night, they made plans for the wedding, talked about what it would be like to raise their child together, about where they wanted to live as a family, about how they would transform their professional relationship into a true life partnership. And for the first time since they had signed the original agreement, both were absolutely sure that they were building something that would last forever, based on the true love that had blossomed between them, unexpectedly, but inevitably. A life fulfilled, the unconventional love story, concludes the wedding took place on a sunny Saturday morning, exactly 3 weeks before the baby's due date. Clara was radiant at 8.5 months pregnant, wearing a specially designed maternity wedding dress in white silk with lace details that enhanced her prominent belly instead of hiding it. The dress had been a gift from William, who insisted on hiring the best seamstress in New York City to create something unique and special for her, something that would make her feel like the most beautiful bride in the world, even in the last days of her pregnancy. The ceremony was intimate, held in the garden of the house William had bought for them to live in as a family, an elegant yet cozy residence in the Hamptons, with 4 bedrooms, a spacious garden, and a nursery he had personally decorated with light wood furniture and details in shades of yellow and green, neutral colors, as they had decided to keep the baby's gender a surprise until birth. Only 20 people were present: William's parents, who had reconciled with their son's choice after getting to know Clara better and realizing what made him happy, a few close friends of the couple, and the 2 women from the old boarding house where Clara had lived, who had become like older sisters to her over the years. I, William Arthur Archer, take you, Clara Marie Jenkins, as my wife, to love and cherish in joy and sorrow, in sickness and in health, in richness and in poverty, all the days of our life together, William said, his voice choked with emotion, holding her small hands in his, while looking directly into her green eyes that shone with happiness. The traditional wedding vows gained a special meaning in that context, because they represented not only a legal union, but the transformation of a business agreement into the most beautiful love story any of those present had witnessed. I, Clara Marie Jenkins, take you, William Arthur Archer, as my husband, to love and cherish in joy and sorrow, in sickness and in health, in richness and in poverty, all the days of our life together, Clara replied, with tears of joy streaming down her face, while feeling the baby move animatedly in her belly, as if also celebrating that special moment. And I promise to raise our child with all the love I feel for you, so that he or she grows up in a family united by true love. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, William kissed her with a passion that made all present sigh with emotion. It was a kiss that sealed not only a marriage, but the conclusion of a journey that had begun with practical necessity and had transformed into the purest manifestation of love 2 human beings could share. When they separated, both were crying with happiness, and Clara placed William's hand on her belly so he could feel the baby move, as if the child was also celebrating the official union of their parents. The reception was simple but elegant, with a lunch in the garden of their new home. Soft music played by a string quartet, and a 3-tiered cake decorated with natural flowers that matched Clara's bouquet. During their first dance as a married couple, William held his wife with extreme care, one hand on her waist and the other protecting her belly where their child was growing. "I love you, Mrs. Archer," he whispered in her ear as they danced slowly. "And I love you, Mr. Archer," she replied, resting her head on his chest and letting herself be carried away by the music and the complete happiness that enveloped her. The arrival of joy and a lasting legacy. 2 weeks and 4 days after the wedding, on a rainy Tuesday morning, Clara woke up at 3 a.m. with regular and intense contractions that made her realize immediately that the baby had decided to arrive. "William, wake up," she said, gently shaking her husband. "I think it's time." He woke up instantly, with the heightened reflexes of someone who had spent the last few weeks sleeping with one ear always alert to signs that the birth could begin at any moment. The drive to the hospital was a mixture of nervousness, excitement, and pure love. William drove with extra care while holding Clara's hand between contractions, whispering words of encouragement and love. "You're doing amazing, my love." "Our baby is coming," he said, every time he saw her face contract with pain. Soon, we'll meet our son or daughter." Labor lasted 8 intense hours, during which William did not leave Clara's side for a minute. He massaged her back, offered water, wiped the sweat from her forehead, and held her hand tightly every time a stronger contraction hit her. "I couldn't have done it alone," she said during a pause between the most intense contractions. "You give me strength, William. You make me feel like I can do anything." At 11:17 in the morning, after 40 minutes of final pushing, the loud, strong cry of a baby echoed through the delivery room. "It's a girl," announced Dr. Green, lifting the tiny newborn, a perfectly formed baby girl. "A beautiful and healthy girl." William looked at the newborn and openly wept, not caring who might see him showing emotion. "She's perfect," he whispered, kissing Clara's sweaty forehead. "You did something miraculous, my love. You brought our daughter into the world." When they placed the baby on Clara's chest, she looked at that wrinkled face and felt a love so intense she thought her heart would explode. "Look at her, William. Look at our daughter." "She has blue eyes," Clara said, delicately touching the baby's tiny face. "And she has your nose and mouth," William completed, extending his finger to touch the tiny baby, who immediately clasped around his large finger. "What will we call her?" "Eleanor," Clara said immediately, as if she had always known that would be the name. "Eleanor Archer. It means bright light, and she brought light into our lives." William agreed immediately, because the name sounded perfect for the child who had been conceived in a business arrangement, but born of the purest love between two human beings. 6 months later, on a sunny Sunday afternoon, the family was gathered in the garden of their home. Eleanor, now a chubby, giggling baby, was at Clara's breast, who was breastfeeding her calmly while William read the newspaper in a chair beside them. Their domestic routine had naturally established itself, with William assuming the role of a present and participatory father, waking up for night feedings, changing diapers, bathing the baby, and completely melting every time his daughter smiled at him. "Do you regret anything?" Clara asked, looking at her husband who had put down the newspaper to make funny faces at Eleanor. "I regret taking so long to realize I loved you," William replied, kissing his daughter's forehead first, and then his wife's lips. "I regret all the years we lost keeping our distance when we could have been happy together much earlier." "I think everything happened at the right time," Clara said, adjusting Eleanor at her breast. "If you had declared yourself earlier, maybe I would have thought it was harassment. If I had confessed my feelings, maybe you would have been uncomfortable. The agreement gave us the excuse we needed to get closer, and love grew naturally from that." That night, after putting Eleanor to sleep in the bassinet beside their bed, William and Clara lay embraced and talked about their plans for the future. The company was prospering more than ever, with William officially assuming the presidency and Clara working as a human resources consultant, applying her natural sensitivity to dealing with people in the corporate environment. They wanted more children, a beach house, family trips, and, most importantly, many years of happiness together. "Clara, you transformed my life in a way I never imagined possible," William said, stroking her hair as she snuggled into his chest. "You taught me that true love can be born from the most improbable circumstances, and that sometimes what seems like a business agreement can transform into the greatest blessing of our lives. And you taught me that it's worth taking risks for love," Clara replied, gently hugging his chest. "That sometimes we need to accept impossible proposals to discover possibilities we never imagined." They fell asleep that night, with Eleanor sleeping peacefully beside them, A complete family formed by the most improbable, yet truest love either of them could have dreamed of. And so, what began as a desperate agreement between a millionaire who needed an heir and an executive assistant who had always secretly loved him, transformed into the most beautiful proof that true love always finds a way, even when it arises from the most unexpected circumstances and develops in ways that defy all social conventions and rational expectations. If you've made it this far on this emotional journey of Clara and William, I hope you've been as moved as I am telling this love story that was born from the most improbable of agreements. This story teaches us that sometimes destiny uses the most winding paths to unite two souls that were made for each other, and that true love always finds a way to bloom, even in the most challenging circumstances. Leave a loving. Like if you believe that love can be born where we least expect it. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our heartwarming stories, and share this narrative with someone special who needs to believe that happy endings exist in real life. Comment below. Do you think it was destiny that brought Clara and William together, or would their love have happened anyway? And tell me also, where are you accompanying us from? What city, what part of the world is listening to this love story? May God bless each of you with much love, much happiness, and the courage to accept the impossible proposals that can sometimes lead us to the greatest loves of our lives. Until the next story. And always remember, when love is true, it always finds a way to happen.